iPad Air 4 was pretty much the star of the crappy show we saw yesterday because it had the most amount of changes year over year to the iPad Air lineup, but let's be honest with ourselves. As much as Apple liked to talk about this being a new design and introducing USB-C and the smart connector support and all that, we know what the iPad Air 4 really was. It's a dumbed-down version of the 11-inch iPad Pro to improve on affordability, but the truth is that $600 price tag really worth it compared to what you can get out of the 11-inch iPad Pro, particularly the one from 2018. Without further ado, let's begin. So look, I totally get it. A lot of us want the new thing, right? The Air 4 comes in all these pretty new colors that the iPad Pro never came in, and the iPad Pro is old news, alright? We've known about it for almost 2 years now. It was unveiled back in October of 2018, so yeah, we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary, and you don't want to buy something that's 2 years old because that's not going to be so flashy. You want to buy the new latest thing on the website, but the truth is, the 11-inch iPad Pro can offer you quite a bit more than the Air 4 honestly does, and to be frank, as an Apple sheep, I'm kind of disappointed with a lot of the corners they cut, literally and figuratively, on the iPad Air 4, that in my opinion doesn't necessarily justify the $600 price tag, and I think it would have been much better if they priced it at $500, but they didn't, and that's the reality of the situation we're living in right now. So, what are the differences between these two iPads? What are you really gaining by buying an old, refurbished, or used 11-inch iPad Pro versus going with the iPad Air 4? Well, for one, Face ID. In my opinion, this is one of the best features the iPad Pro has over the Air 4 because while it's cool that for the first time Apple has now embedded Touch ID into a power button, they've never done that before. I use my iPad quite a bit, and let me be honest with you, I almost never tap the power button anymore, and there's a good reason why. It's because Face ID is so simple and seamless. Whether you have a folio cover or a keyboard case, just when you open the iPad Pro, the screen lights up, it's already looking for your face, and because it works in any orientation, it unlocks, and I just have to either press the space bar to go to the home screen or swipe up. It's very simple and very easy, and pretty much the only time I end up pressing that power button is when I want to take a screenshot or activate Siri without actually calling out to her for some reason, which is pretty rare. I don't do that very much, and if Apple was to implement Touch ID in a more bezel-less style design, I guess the power button is probably the best way to do it, but in my opinion still, it's going to be objectively worse than Face ID, okay? Because before, Touch ID was embedded in the home button before, and yeah, you could ignore the home button if you wanted, but still, people were kind of used to iPads being able to just press the home button to go home, so pressing that home button to unlock it was pretty simple and intuitive because it was where you were pressing to go home anyway, so having Touch ID there just made sense, whereas now there's no button on the front of the Air 4, which means you can tap to wake up the display, but it won't unlock until you rest your specifically registered finger on that power button, and it's also further away than the home button used to be because even if you were using it like a laptop or in landscape mode, the home button is somewhere where your finger could naturally rest. It was in the middle of the iPad's length, or if you're using it in portrait mode, it would be like an older iPhone where you just press the home button to go home. Power button though is a reach up, especially if you're planning on using the Air 4 with a Magic Keyboard case. You're going to the very top corner of the iPad and resting your finger there, and in my opinion this is an extra step. There's extra complexity, especially when logging into certain apps or signing in with certain passwords compared to Face ID where you can literally just click on the password text box, it automatically starts looking for you and then unlocks. You don't have to do anything, whereas on this one it's going to say rest your finger on the power button, rest your finger on the power button because your finger's naturally not going to be there and it's not looking for your face, which is naturally there. So my point is the iPad Pro has Face ID and that's better. The other big advantage it has over the Air 4 is 120 Hertz ProMotion technology, which as we've talked about with the iPhones, in my opinion is really awesome and noticeable, but I get it. Some of you are saying 60 Hertz is fine, I can't really see a difference anyway. I would argue that it matters a little bit more on the iPad Pro simply because of the Apple Pencil, and when you're drawing with something or taking notes, 120 Hertz versus 60 Hertz I think is vastly more appreciated compared to the debate we have with 120 Hertz being important for iPhones. We go back and forth on that all the time. I think it's really nice, but I also admit most people probably can't tell the difference, but mainly with iPhones we're just talking about like scrolling and the way apps move around sound and motion on the display, whereas on the iPad, if you use it for taking notes and you want to use a stylus for it, 120 Hertz does make a much more noticeable difference to the average consumer. Now, processing-wise, I actually think these two iPads are pretty dang close. Again, the Air 4 might have a little bit of an advantage here with the A14 chip, which, if the rumors are true and the numbers Apple is giving us is correct, it sounds like it could outperform the A12X chip a little bit, but not substantially, okay? So I don't think that the Air 4 is necessarily going to be capable of doing a bunch of things that the 11-inch iPad Pro can't, unless we start getting into the great distant future, like which iPad will get more years of support. Honestly, the chips are pretty evenly matched, and I don't think the performance differences will be that noticeable, so either way, both chips are easily going to be getting 5 to 6 years of software support, whether you buy the 2018 iPad Pro or you buy the Air 4 next month. Camera-wise, these iPads are almost identical, same front-facing camera, same rear-facing camera. However, the iPad Pro does have flash, if you care about that type of thing, and the iPad Pro does have portrait mode thanks to that true depth camera system on the front. So if you care about that type of thing, I guess you do have it on the iPad Pro. And believe it or not, the dimensions of the Air 4 compared to the iPad Pro are actually very slightly different. Likely not something you would notice when holding the two of them, but the website does go into detail that the iPad Pro is 5.9 millimeters thin, whereas the Air 4 is 6.1 millimeters thin. So maybe this is Apple's direct response to, you know, the iPads bending too easily. The Air 4 is a little bit thicker, but surprisingly not heavier. The iPad Air 4 comes in at just 1 pound, which is just ever so slightly lighter than the iPad Pro, which I do agree is weird. The Air 4 is thicker, but lighter at the same time. I don't really know how. But also, the iPad Pro is ever so slightly wider, just by like 0.02 inches. It's a very small difference, but technically, the form factors are a little off. They're not exactly the same. However, they're both compatible with the same Magic Keyboard case, so don't have to worry about compatibility here. And it's also worth mentioning that the iPad Pro display will get a little bit brighter. Apple detailed on their website that the iPad Pros go up to 600 nits. The Air 4, however, goes up to 500 nits. So in day-to-day use, this probably won't be that noticeable, but if you plan on using your iPad outside or somewhere where it's very bright in the sun, the iPad Pro is probably going to do a little bit better than the Air 4. The bezels on the Air 4 are also ever so slightly thicker. Again, it probably won't be super noticeable when using them side by side, but on the website you can actually see it ever so slightly. So despite these iPads being a near identical form factor, the iPad Pro does have a little bit thinner bezels, and that's what gives it that 11-inch screen size, whereas the Air 4 is a 10.9-inch display simply because the bezels are a slight more chonk than the iPad Pro. Also, something I recently discovered, and I'm not sure if this is an error on the website or something that was put in intentionally, but Apple's compare page says that the iPad Air 4 does not have the ability to output power from the USB-C port to charge another device, like for instance your iPhone. It does list this for the 11-inch iPad Pro, suggesting that you can charge external computers from that USB-C port, and that feature is not listed for the Air 4. But don't quote me on that necessarily, because they may have just forgotten to put it there, or for some reason decided, you know what, the Air 4 isn't going to be capable of charging little extra accessories if you want to, which would kind of suck. I don't want that to be the case. It's USB-C, you know, take it to its full potential. However, another big advantage the Air 4 has of just being a later generation up-to-date iPad is it does support Wi-Fi 6. So if you care about that latest, greatest generation Wi-Fi, you can get that on the Air 4. But reminder, Bluetooth 5 is still an option on the 11-inch iPad Pro. It may be getting old, but it did have the latest generation Bluetooth, which is good. Now, when it comes to pricing, obviously the iPad Air 4 is $600, but the 11-inch iPad Pro, because Apple is not selling it directly, is a bit of a mixed bag. You have to look around on Amazon or eBay to see what kind of prices they're going for, but the real winner that I think you guys should keep your eye out for, but it seems like everyone is doing the same thing, is the certified refurbished from Apple 11-inch iPad Pro. They're very hard to find now because I think anytime one goes up for sale, they're immediately bought and taken away. But if you can find a 64 gig 11-inch iPad Pro from 2018 from Apple's website, it's basically brand new. For those who didn't know, certified refurbished means Apple really cleans up the whole device. They update certain internals and even some of the external components. So it's basically like getting a brand new product. It just won't have a picture of the iPad on the outside of the box. But other than that, it's essentially brand new, and they charged $550 for that iPad. So you would actually save money by going with the iPad Pro from 2018. Now, in my opinion, that's a way better value. That's a way better deal than the iPad Air 4, again, if you can find it, because it's very hard to see them go on sale like that. But I'm sure Best Buy or 9 to 5 Toys will will tweet out when there's some kind of bundle or discount for the older iPad Pros, but you've got some time to do some hunting, basically. The Air 4 is not coming out until October, whereas these kinds of discounts and bundles you can find on other websites are going on all the time. So basically just keep your eyes peeled for the next month, because in my opinion, 11-inch iPad Pro is a way better deal. You get Face ID, 120 Hertz, quad speakers instead of just stereo. Yes, Apple lists them as different speaker systems, so I'm not sure if the iPad Pro is necessarily louder or sounds better in some way, but iPad Pro has a brighter display. Yeah, the A12X chip may not be exactly as fast as the A14 chip, but still really, really close. There's nothing today that the Air 4 is going to be capable of processing and GPU-wise that the iPad Pro can't do, and I would heavily suggest you think about looking around at least for the 11-inch iPad Pro before you commit fully to the Air 4, but some of you are probably fully committed anyway, just because I want that green iPad. But just remember, if you're using this thing with a folio cover, or you're using this thing with a Magic Keyboard case, you're never gonna see that green aluminum on the back. Apple has a way of taking pictures of their products and making them look so good, and then you get them in person and they will never look like that, okay? Remember, those marketing images they're showing you, it's never gonna look like, it's just gonna be an iPad, all right? It's gonna sit on your couch, it's gonna collect fingerprints, it's gonna collect little smudges, and it'll eventually just be another slab of glass in your home. So try to make the most out of your money if possible, and I totally get why Apple made the Air 4. You know, they don't want to keep selling the 2-year-old iPad Pro for cheaper and cheaper. They would lose too much money, so this is their way of cutting costs, cutting corners, and making a more mid-tier iPad that's high price, but a lot of people I think are still going to buy it and end up enjoying it. So let me know if you guys still want the Air 4 over an 11-inch iPad Pro for $550. What features from the Air 4 am I missing? Also worth mentioning, the Air 4 can only max out at 256 gigs of storage, whereas the 11-inch iPad Pro from 2020 with the LiDAR sensor, that starts with 128 gigs of storage. So if you are planning on buying a higher storage configuration for the iPad Air, you're actually really close to 11-inch iPad Pro pricing. So hopefully I gave you some things to consider. Thank you all for watching. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.